It has been 1 year since Manor Lords stormed onto the scene, blending the medieval city building and warfare in a way that we'd never seen before. So just weeks, it sold over 2 million copies, shattering records with over 170,000 concurrent players at launch. Fast forward to today, over 3 million copies have been sold. Everybody trying to get their hand at ruling these medieval towns. From a passion project by a single developer to one of the best city builders, not just of 2024, but I would have said going on for all time. Manor Lords' journey has been nothing short of extraordinary. This is Manor Lords 1 year later. The story begins long before early access. Manor Lords started turning heads with its original announcement back in 2020. It was no ordinary city builder. It promised in-depth organic city growth, complex economic and social simulation, and large-scale tactical battles. At least that's what people thought back at the time. Even more impressively, it was a medieval passion project of just one man, a guy called Slavic Magic. He spent several years crafting this version for the trailer to be released. Of course, set in 14th century medieval landscapes in Europe. The aim, to let players build bustling towns from scratch and command armies in real-time epic battles. Kind of like your Banished or medieval city skylines meets Total War. And from day one, the concept had fans excited as hell. City building meets Total War? What more could people want? Players imagined your Banished village life fused with medieval Total War's battles, and my god did it look gorgeous. Graphically, this was almost the medieval Total War 3 that people were waiting for. At least, that was it on the surface. Screenshots and dev blogs showcase gridless constructions. I remember first seeing when the roads can be constructed so naturally and integrating itself so well into the world. Towns would grow naturally along trade routes and terrain. Early footage teased immersive details. Seasons changing with autumn's orange forest and of course the winter, seeing troops march through the snow and the deformation around their feet. Peasants hauling timber with oxen, and a third-person mode letting you walk around the villages, not necessarily being able to interact with them, but get down and see how beautiful this game really was. From the get-go, it was definitely clear that this was just not another city builder. It was an ambitious and, more importantly, lovingly crafted one. Tim Bender, the CEO of now publisher Hooded Horse, said, "It's a game where you can follow an ox around or observe the lives of peasants. Those experiences connect with players." By 2021, Manor Lords had become one of the most wishlisted games on Steam. In fact, heading into 2023, it amassed over 2 million Steam wishlists. Almost unheard of, especially for such a small-scale project at this point. Some gaming outlets noted that it was perhaps the most wishlisted game to debut in 2023. The hype even sparked imitators, other studios producing medieval city builder-like games. I mean, there was one back in the day called Viking City Builder. By the way, if any of you wishlisted that game still does not exist. I remember the trailer for Viking City Builder coming out and thinking, hold on, this is a shot-for-shot rip-off of the Manor Lords initial trailer. And boy oh boy, as it comes to be, they never actually released that game, just like Playway always loved to bloody do. But Manor Lords was the original game, and its community grew ravenous for any news. Launch day, April 26th, 2024. Thousands of would-be lords smashed that download button for the moment that Manor Lords hit early access and Steam. Years of anticipation had led to this moment. The result, it became an instant hit. Huge media outlets started covering it. It became almost mainstream entirely from day one. Within hours, it had over 100,000 concurrent players simultaneously building and breaking Steam records for this genre. By the end of its first weekend, it had hit the top of the charts globally. Slavic Magic and publisher Hooded Horse were absolutely floored by this, of course. They said, "We expected interest, but not this." Both the publishers and the developers were completely taken aback by how popular it was. Jumping into early access though, players found a game that was both remarkably polished in some areas and, well, clearly unfinished in others. Exactly what early access is for, to be honest, but because of the hype that built around it, there were some questions around whether the game was actually fully baked. On the positive side, the core city building gameplay was deep and engrossing. You start with a patch of land, a few families, and you gradually build up a medieval settlement, plotting burgers plots for homes, setting up farms, foraging camps, lumberyards, and way more. The gridless building system let creativity flow really nicely, with winding roads and organically placed buildings following the landscape. I absolutely loved how authentic it felt. The fields, the seasons, and of course, all of this feeling like you're carving out a town in the wilderness. Of course, the reviews became incredibly overwhelming. most people marveling at misty hills, autumn forests, and villagers realistically going on their day-to-day jobs. The fact that there was even this level of detail that came from a one-person dev team left all of us just absolutely in awe, especially at a time where game developments and huge companies cannot do anything even close to the authenticity of Manor Lords. It was something that stood out from the crowd. However, it was clear that Manor Lords Early Access was just the foundation of a larger vision. Certain promised features were only partially implemented or missing entirely at launch. For example, the game's scope included city building and RTS warfare, but the combat and grand strategy element was a bit bare bones. Like, there was RTS, but it wasn't even close to Total War, and whilst we were warned about this before the launch, I think a lot of people wanted just a tiny bit more detail and micromanaging here. I mean, you could recruit basic militias and even face off with roaming bandits, but battles were pretty simplistic. One intense skirmish outside a village church, you could have formations, advanced tactics, AI sophistication, but AI was just not quite there yet. The strategic map did exist with neighboring regions and rulers to interact with, but a lot of its functionality was just placeholder. I mean, Eurogamer, my favorite gaming outlet, pointed out that you could open diplomatic letters and technically declare war or negotiate, but it just doesn't quite work yet. And that is in some ways still true to this day. The fact that you can talk to the AI is one thing, but actually having that impact your game is something that they're still working on. There was that third person mode that you could, dive in and walk around your little town or village, but it was nothing more than that at this point in time. We still don't know what the actual intention is this. Is it just going to be an ability to look down and dirty at your men and your villagers and everyone going about their daily lives, or will there be a gameplay implementation to this third person mode? I am yet to see. Early Access also launched with only one regional map available to play and no campaign or story mode. Some players who expected a grand strategy layer or even multiple scenarios found the content somewhat limited. I mean, let's be honest, it was an early access game made by one person, but because of the sheer amount of hype and audience that are built around it, I think there was a lot of expectations that went sorely missed. Unfairly, maybe, but the reality, that is still the case. After this kind of flashy launch and great first impression on the whole, one of the biggest questions came: what's next? Why would players stick around? What would keep them coming back time after time? I mean, early access games often see a spike and a drop in player count, and Manor Lords was no exception, but let's actually have a look at those numbers and see what's happened. In the first few weeks, Manor Lords was on fire, of course. As we mentioned, it's topped those sales charts and maintained a huge concurrent player count, about 170,000 on Steam. Throughout the first week, it stayed in the tens of thousands. And by the way, let's not forget, this is also on Game Pass, so those numbers will be highly bigger than what we can see just here. In May of 2024, the game had sold over 2 million copies, which is insane for a debut title from a new developer. Naturally, though, after the initial rush, the player count did start to decline a little bit. As people had checked it out, they decided if they liked it or didn't want it. It stabilized at around 10,000 concurrent players, and so in other words, after millions had tried the game, roughly around 10,000 were actively still tending to their thieves on the average day. But that's not as the disastrous claim as it might seem to start with. This happens with all single player games. I mean, me for one, I played the game intently for a couple of months and then not so much. In fact, I haven't touched it in a while as of making this video because there hasn't been a load of new content coming back into it, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the game has not lived up to expectations or made it feel worth the purchase price, but what it does mean, there isn't a huge incentive for people to keep coming back time and time again. Despite this, we still need to remember this is a small title made by, at least at the start, a one-man team. 10,000 active daily players is actually insane. A solid feat for a non-live service game. The drop-off was of course expected, because once players felt like they'd completed the available content, many just put it to the side for now. So how can they keep players coming back? A year of early access means a year of extra bits, updates, patches, and improvements. Slavic Magic might be a solo developer, but they've got a lot of help now as far as I'm aware. Let's chronologically break down some of those major updates. In May of 2024, of course, we got the first big patch just weeks after launch, releasing our first update, tackling bugs, adding some new mechanics. You had the new revamped trading system. Now players could trade between their own towns via trading posts. Initially, that wasn't really particularly available. You also gained a bit of finer control, like toggling trade-specific goods and dynamically seeing best trade prices. We also had the royal tax being introduced, essentially the head tax collected yearly. This feature made hoarding money a little bit harder and added a bit more of a challenge to the late game economy and another AI maybe enemy to be aware of. Of course, there were so many performance and minor patches that came in. Crashes, improving frame rates, things like villagers now physically carrying corpses to graveyards and the visual to represent it as well. In July and August of 2024, we also got an engine upgrade. They were actually putting the game onto Unreal Engine 5, and whilst it didn't actually on the surface look any different. Under the hood, it really evolved. It really improved optimization and, of course, raised the roof for any advancements that we want later down the road. There was also fishing being added in, of course, and different things like pigs and being able to have butchers as well within the game. Then later on, we got a few more updates, including new maps. In fact, 2 new maps, winding rivers and, of course, the valley and the mountains. These are some of the best that we've had so far. In fact, these are the reasons that I still go back to the game to this day, especially the valley map, seeing the cliffs and the mountains in the distance and being able to evolve your town in order to wind around these extra bits of terrain. I absolutely love it. But one of the hallmarks of a passionate player community is when they start adding their own flair to the game. Despite being in early access, Manor Lords actually developed somewhat of a modding scene. Within weeks of launch, players dug into the game's files and started creating some tweaks and enhances. Of course, you've got things like the Storage Plus mod, which lets you boost the capacity of granaries. You had other things like higher building caps as well. Some people could unlock hidden secrets within the game, and other things like just being able to unlock every skill within Manor Lords as well. Some more cheaty than others, but some quality of life's in there as well. The developer, though, at the time hadn't officially integrated modding support, so most of these required manually editing files, but it didn't really stop the community anyway. So here we are, 1 year after the early access launch, and where is it now? As of spring 2025, Manor Lords is still thriving. It's accumulated over 3 million sales, which is actually a mind-blowing milestone that kind of speaks to the sustained interest within this game. Yet it is still very much under construction. I think me and a lot of other people are still waiting for some extra bits and pieces. We've actually recently had some stone structures being added into the game as well, but having true castles and walls, being able to fortify your towns would be really nice. Cavalry and enhanced combat, they are things that are planned features. I mean, especially cavalry. That's going to be pretty goddamn excited. And maybe even some more factions and cultures. There is of course, the talk about having a proper AI opponent, because at the moment it's just somebody that comes onto the screen with an army and then you can fight them off or just let them do their thing. But it would be nice to see other villages being built up, an AI village that you could look into, trade or even attack, raid them as if you were the bandits, or help them against bandits of their own. I think that would be absolutely incredible. So when are we going to get 1.0? Well, at this point in time, it's never really been confirmed. I would expect it's going to come maybe within this year, 2025. So if we hit that date, that would be very, very nice. But the foundation for Manor Lords is still pretty rock solid, and there is plenty of new content coming on its way. But I'd love to know what you think. Do you want to see things like naval combat coming into the game, or just stick to the basics at this point in time? And how has it lived up to your expectations? Let me know down in the comments below. But please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and until then, I will see you in the next one.